cowboy saw an Apache woman washing clothes by the river and noticed her dress was in rags. A gentle breeze whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the faint, earthy aroma of the river nearby. The cowboy rode slowly along the winding path, his horse's hooves crunching softly against the dirt. His wide-brimmed hat shaded his eyes from the early morning sun, and the soft jingling of spurs marked each careful step he took. He had been traveling for days, moving from one small settlement to another, delivering supplies and taking occasional work where it came. The land stretched endlessly around him, wide and open, beautiful but harsh, demanding both patience and respect from anyone who called it home. As he rounded a gentle bend in the trail, the sound of water reaching his ears made him pause. It was the quiet murmur of a river, flowing steadily over smooth rocks, glinting like scattered silver under the morning sun. He nudged his horse gently, guiding it toward the riverbank. The cowboy needed to refill his water canteen, and the thought of a short rest in the shade of the tall cottonwoods lining the river was inviting. As he drew closer, a movement on the riverbank caught his attention. There, knee-deep in the clear water, was a woman, her sleeves rolled up and her hands busy scrubbing at clothes laid across the rocks. She moved with a quiet, steady rhythm, dipping the garments into the water, beating them lightly, then rinsing them again. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, though a few loose strands had escaped to frame her face. Her eyes were downcast, focused on the task at hand, and the cowboy could see the lines of concentration and care etched softly into her face. But what drew his attention most of all was the state of her dress. It was old and worn, faded from long use and patched in several places. The hem was frayed and the edges had begun to tear, yet she carried herself with dignity, completely unaware, or perhaps completely unconcerned, about how tattered her clothes appeared. The cowboy stopped his horse at the edge of the river, unsure whether to speak. There was a natural caution in him, born from years of wandering this land. He knew better than to startle strangers, especially someone who might not be accustomed to visitors. Yet something in her quiet focus, her calm presence in the gentle chaos of the river, made him hesitate in a way he rarely experienced. He studied her from a distance, noticing the strength in her hands as they worked, the care she took in her actions, and the quiet resilience that seemed to surround her like a protective aura. After a moment, the cowboy decided to move a little closer, still keeping a respectful distance. He dismounted from his horse, letting the reins slide over his arm as he stepped onto the soft, cool grass. The horse nickered softly, sensing the calm energy in the air, and lowered its head to nibble at the fresh shoots near the water's edge. The cowboy breathed deeply, letting the scents of the river and the wildflowers settle over him. He was a man used to solitude, yet for some reason he felt an unusual curiosity toward this woman. Her presence was serene, almost magnetic, and her simplicity and strength struck a chord deep within him. He cleared his throat lightly, careful not to startle her. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying softly across the water. The woman looked up briefly, her dark eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of surprise, then cautious curiosity. She didn't speak immediately, simply studying him for a moment. Her gaze was calm but guarded, as if measuring whether he was a threat. The cowboy smiled gently, tipping his hat slightly as a gesture of respect. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. "I just came by for water." She nodded slowly, returning her attention to the river and the clothes. "It's fine," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "The river is big enough for both of us." The cowboy couldn't help but notice the careful way she moved, how deliberate her motions were as she washed the clothes. There was a quiet dignity in the way she worked, a patience and attention to detail that spoke of experience and resilience. Yet despite her composure, the state of her dress tugged at something in him. It was so worn, so patched, and yet she wore it without embarrassment or complaint. He realized she must live a life of struggle, one where every day required effort, resourcefulness, and courage. Feeling a mix of admiration and concern, he decided to speak again, carefully choosing his words. "You seem to handle all this with a lot of care," he said. "It's not easy work, is it?" She paused for a moment, looking at him. There was no anger or offense in her expression, only a quiet acknowledgement. "It is work," she said simply, "but work is part of life. We do what we must." The cowboy nodded, impressed by her straightforwardness. He had traveled long distances and seen many people, but few carried themselves with such calm dignity despite hardship. Something about her strength drew him in, made him want to understand more, to learn her story. Yet he knew better than to ask too much at once. Patience was essential when trust had to be earned. He turned slightly, filling his canteen at the river but keeping one eye on her. He watched as she lifted the clothes from the water, draping them over the rocks to dry in the sun. Her hands moved with quiet precision, each action deliberate and practiced. It was clear she had done this many times before, each step performed with skill and care. The river, the rocks, and her movements formed a kind of rhythm, almost like a song without words, and he found himself listening in awe. Minutes passed, and a small breeze rippled across the water, carrying with it the soft scent of wildflowers and damp earth. The cowboy felt a strange sense of peace in the presence of the woman, even though they had exchanged so few words. He realized that sometimes it wasn't about talking or asking questions. Sometimes just being nearby, observing the simple acts of life, was enough to form a quiet connection. Finally, he spoke again, this time a little more boldly. "If you don't mind me asking, are you alone here often?" The woman looked at him, considering his question. There was a pause, a moment of hesitation, and then she replied softly, "Most days, yes. The river gives what it can. I manage." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that resonated with him. He sensed the hardships hidden behind her calm demeanor, the challenges she faced every day just to survive. And yet, she faced them with quiet strength and dignity, refusing to complain or seek pity. The cowboy felt a growing respect for her, mixed with a desire to offer help, though he knew he must tread carefully. He adjusted his hat, shading his eyes from the rising sun, and watched her for a few more moments. The river reflected the morning light, sparkling like scattered diamonds across the surface. The woman dipped a garment into the water, beat it gently against the rocks, and rinsed it with care. Each motion was deliberate, almost ritualistic, and the cowboy felt a sense of calm wash over him. He realized that this moment, simple and quiet as it was, held a kind of beauty he rarely encountered. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light across the plains, the cowboy finished filling his canteen. He mounted his horse again, feeling the leather saddle beneath him, and turned to look at the woman one last time before continuing his journey. She was still at the river, focused on her work, the tattered dress moving gently with the breeze. He felt a strange mix of admiration and concern, a desire to know her story and perhaps, in some small way, offer assistance. With a final nod, he tipped his hat once more and urged his horse forward. As he rode away, he couldn't shake the image of her by the river, her hands busy, her dress in rags, yet her spirit unbroken. It was a scene that would stay with him, a quiet reminder of resilience, dignity, and the strength of the human spirit. The river continued to flow, its waters sparkling in the morning light, carrying with it the quiet story of a woman who faced her challenges with courage, and a cowboy who had glimpsed a life far different from his own, yet strangely familiar in its determination and quiet. Grace. The cowboy's horse trotted along the soft dirt path, the morning sun now climbing steadily into the sky. Yet, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman by the river. There was something in the way she worked, quietly and with strength, that stayed in his mind. He wondered what her life must be like, how she managed day after day with so little. Curiosity tugged at him, and he felt a strong urge to understand more, but he also knew he had to be careful. Trust was something earned, not demanded, especially with someone who lived a life so different from his own. The next morning, he returned to the river. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows on the water. The cowboy slowed his horse to a gentle walk, careful not to make too much noise. As he approached, he saw her again, kneeling by the river, her hands moving rhythmically over a pile of clothes. Her dress, worn and patched, shimmered faintly in the sunlight, and her dark hair fell in loose strands around her face. She had noticed him arrive this time, and she paused for a moment, her eyes meeting his. "Good morning," the cowboy said softly, tipping his hat in respect. The woman's eyes flickered with surprise, but there was no fear this time. She gave a small nod. "Good morning," she replied, her voice calm but cautious. He dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby tree. The animal nickered softly, sensing the quiet tension in the air. The cowboy approached slowly, keeping his hands visible so she would not feel threatened. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "I just thought I could say hello again." The woman studied him carefully. There was a pause long enough to make the cowboy wonder if he had overstepped. Finally, she spoke. "You are not disturbing me," she said, her voice firm but polite. "The river is open to everyone." He smiled, relieved. "I saw you yesterday," he said. "You work very carefully." "I admire that." Her eyes softened slightly, though she did not look away. "Work must be done," she said simply. "Care makes it better. It is not easy, but it is necessary." The cowboy felt a quiet respect for her words. There was no complaint in her voice, no bitterness, only acceptance of life's challenges. He wanted to ask more, to know her story, but he remembered his own lessons from years on the plains. Patience was key. Trust would come with time, not with words. For a few minutes, they watched the river together. The water moved steadily over smooth stones, creating a soft, musical sound that filled the morning air. Birds flitted from tree to tree, and a light breeze made the river's surface shimmer. The cowboy noticed how careful she was with each piece of clothing, how gently she scrubbed and rinsed, as if each movement were part of a quiet ceremony. He realized that every small detail in her life mattered to her. "I'm curious," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Do you live near here?" The woman paused, considering the question. "Not far," she replied. "I have a small place. It is simple, but it is mine. It is enough." He nodded. There was something admirable in her independence, in the way she accepted her life and made the most of it. "It is good to have a place to call home," he said. "I have traveled far, and I know how important it is to have even a little place to rest." She studied him quietly, then spoke again. "You travel alone?" "Yes," he said, "most of the time. I deliver goods, sometimes work for people along the way. The road is long and often lonely." There was a brief pause, a quiet understanding that passed between them. Both had lives that required endurance and self-reliance. He admired her strength, and he could sense that she recognized some of his resilience as well. For the first time, he felt a subtle connection forming, a silent acknowledgement of shared determination, despite their different worlds. The cowboy looked around the river, then back at her. "If you don't mind," he said carefully, "I could help you sometime. I know the work is hard, and I have some supplies that might be useful." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Her hands continued to move, scrubbing a shirt with careful attention. "I manage," she said quietly, "but you may leave something if it is meant to help." Encouraged by her words, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small bundle. "I brought some flour, sugar, and fabric," he said, placing it gently on the riverbank. "Nothing big, but it may help." The woman glanced at the items, then back at him. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly replaced by quiet appreciation. "Thank you," she said softly. "It is generous of you." He nodded, tipping his hat once more. "I only wish to help," he said. "No one should have to struggle alone if there is a way to make life easier." She looked at him, really looked for the first time, as if weighing the truth in his words. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right," she said. "Sometimes help is good if given with respect." The cowboy felt a warmth in his chest. Respect was everything. He had no intention of imposing himself on her life. His goal was only to offer kindness, quietly and without expectation. He realized that even a small gesture could mean a great deal to someone living with constant struggle. For the next hour, they worked in quiet companionship. He collected firewood nearby, keeping a respectful distance while she continued washing clothes. Every now and then, he would ask a small question, gentle and careful, about her day or her work. She answered in short, clear sentences, revealing glimpses of her life without revealing too much. She spoke of her children, whom she cared for alone, and of the small victories she found each day in managing her home. The cowboy listened with interest and admiration. He realized that her life, though difficult, was filled with courage, perseverance, and quiet dignity. There was no bitterness, only acceptance and determination. He felt a growing respect for her and a desire to continue helping, little by little, in ways she would allow. When the sun climbed higher and the morning began to warm, he decided it was time to leave. He mounted his horse slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "I will be back," he said softly, unsure why he felt compelled to promise. She paused, looking up at him. "Perhaps," she said. There was no certainty in her tone, only cautious acceptance. As he rode away, the cowboy glanced back at her one last time. She was kneeling by the river, her hands moving with quiet care over the wet clothes. The sunlight highlighted the frayed edges of her dress, but her posture and calm expression conveyed strength far greater than the tattered fabric could ever show. He felt a deep sense of admiration and a growing desire to help, knowing that he could not leave things as they were. The cowboy's mind lingered on her story as he rode through the open plains. Who was she? How had she come to live this life alone by the river? He didn't have the answers, but he knew that patience, respect, and small acts of kindness could build trust. And trust, he realized, was the foundation for any meaningful connection. Over the next few days, he returned to the river quietly and carefully. Each time he brought small gifts, some fresh vegetables, extra fabric, or simple household items that might make her work easier. She noticed, but never made a fuss, simply leaving him a quiet nod or a brief word of thanks. In these small gestures, a silent bond began to grow, a bond built not on words, but on mutual respect and unspoken understanding. One morning, as he approached, he saw her struggling to carry a large bundle of clothes from the river. Without a word, he stepped forward to help, lifting the heaviest portion so that she could manage the rest. She glanced at him, surprise flashing in her eyes, but she did not protest. For the first time, she allowed someone into her space in a practical, meaningful way. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice softer than usual. There was a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You are thoughtful." The cowboy tipped his hat, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "It is nothing," he said. "Sometimes we all need a little help." As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the river and the plains beyond, a quiet friendship began to form. It was subtle, built on respect and small acts of kindness, but it carried the promise of something more: understanding, trust, and a connection that transcended differences. The cowboy knew he could not force anything, nor did he wish to. He only hoped to be a presence she could count on, a steady and respectful support in her otherwise solitary life. And in return, he found something rare and precious, a glimpse into a life lived with courage, simplicity, and quiet strength, lessons he would carry with him long after he rode away. The river continued to flow, and she continued her work, each movement deliberate and strong. And somewhere between the sunlit water and the worn edges of her dress, the cowboy realized that sometimes the smallest gestures, offered with respect and care, could open doors to understanding, friendship, and perhaps even more. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, and the morning air was warm but not yet hot. The cowboy had ridden along the familiar trail, feeling the soft earth beneath his horse's hooves. The river had become a place he looked forward to visiting, not just for the water, but because of the quiet presence of the Apache woman. Each day, the thought of her strength and dignity lingered in his mind, like a small spark he couldn't ignore. When he arrived at the river that morning, he noticed her immediately. She was bending over the water, scrubbing clothes with careful motions. The tattered dress she wore fluttered in the gentle breeze, the worn edges moving like soft waves. This time he did not hesitate to approach. He tied his horse to a nearby tree and walked closer, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Good morning," he said softly, tipping his hat. The woman looked up and smiled faintly. Her eyes, dark and steady, seemed to welcome his presence now, not with suspicion but with a quiet acknowledgement. "Good morning," she replied, her voice calm as the river around them. He noticed she was carrying more clothes than usual, and some were heavy with mud. Without thinking too much, he stepped forward. "Do you want some help?" he asked, trying to sound casual. For a moment she hesitated. He could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes. She had been managing her life alone for so long that offering her space to another person felt unfamiliar. Then, after a careful pause, she nodded slightly. "Yes, that would be helpful," she said quietly. The cowboy bent down and lifted one of the heavier bundles, feeling the weight in his arms. She continued to carry the rest, but it was easier now. He could see that she moved with more ease, her shoulders less tense. There was a quiet rhythm to their actions, like two people slowly learning how to work together without words. As they finished gathering the clothes and laying them on the rocks to rinse, he spoke softly. "I brought something yesterday, some flour and fabric. Did it help?" She glanced at him, a small smile appearing on her face. "Yes," she admitted. "It was thoughtful. The fabric, I made some patches for my dress. It is stronger now." He felt a warmth spread through him. Even small gestures, he realized, could make a difference. He wanted to continue helping, but he also wanted to be careful not to intrude on her independence. "I'm glad it helped," he said. "I only want to make your work easier, not take away from what you do." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "You do not take away anything," she said. "Sometimes help is welcome if it is given with respect." He smiled, feeling the connection deepen slightly. There was an understanding between them now, a quiet trust beginning to grow. He watched her as she worked, noticing the careful way she scrubbed each garment, the way her hands moved with precision and care. There was patience in every motion, a steady strength that impressed him more than words could express. After a while he found a quiet spot nearby and sat down on a rock. He wanted to talk, to know more about her, but he was careful not to overwhelm her. "Do you mind if I ask about your life?" he asked gently. "I mean, only if you want to share." She paused, looking down at the water for a moment, then back at him. "It is not an easy story," she said quietly. "I lost my husband many years ago. Since then I care for my children alone. Every day is work. Every day is challenge." The cowboy nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. He could see the quiet determination in her face, the way she managed to continue despite hardship. "You are very strong," he said. "I respect that. Many people would find it hard to carry on alone, yet you do it every day." Her eyes softened slightly, though she did not look away. "Strength is not always choice," she said. "Sometimes it is necessity, but words of respect are rare, thank you." He smiled quietly, feeling a sense of warmth and admiration. There was courage in her calm acceptance of life, a quiet bravery that touched him deeply. "I only speak what I see," he said, "and I see someone who does not give up, no matter how difficult things are." For the next hour, they worked together in silence, passing clothes to each other, rinsing and scrubbing, sharing small gestures rather than words. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that happens when two people are beginning to understand each other. The cowboy felt a sense of peace he rarely experienced. Here, by the river, with the sun shining and the gentle sound of water moving over stones, life seemed simple and clear. After the work was done, she gathered the clothes to dry in the sun. He noticed her hands were rough but steady, her movements careful and precise. "You have learned a lot about managing on your own," he said softly. "You have skills many people never need to learn." She looked at him, a small smile appearing again. "Life teaches what is necessary," she said. "Some skills are learned the hard way." He laughed quietly, thinking of all the skills he had picked up during his travels and how much she must have endured. "I imagine you are very resourceful," he said. "It is impressive how you manage everything yourself," she nodded. "It is life," she said, "and life is hard for many. I do not complain. I do what I must." The cowboy could not help but admire her even more. There was a quiet nobility in her acceptance of life's challenges, a dignity that came not from wealth or comfort, but from strength of spirit. He felt a desire to continue helping, not to change her life, but simply to make it a little easier, a little brighter. "I brought some more supplies today," he said gently. "Nothing big, just some dried beans, a few fresh vegetables, and some extra cloth for patches." She looked at him, surprise and gratitude mixing in her expression. "You are very thoughtful," she said quietly. "It is not often someone thinks of others like this." He smiled, tipping his hat. "It is nothing. Small gestures can make a difference, and I can see you work hard every day. You deserve support, even if only a little." For the rest of the morning, they continued working together. He carried firewood from the nearby forest, and she organized the clothes and began sewing patches onto her dress. They shared small conversations about the land, the river, and life in general. He learned about her children, their names and ages, and the pride she took in raising them well. She learned about his travels, the places he had seen, and the people he had met. It was a gentle exchange, each story shared carefully, respecting the other's space and privacy. As the sun rose higher, warming the riverbank, a quiet friendship began to grow. It was not loud or dramatic, but subtle and strong. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her courage and independence, and she began to see that he was sincere in his desire to help, not to intrude. At one point she paused from her work and looked at him directly. "You return often," she said quietly. "Why?" he thought for a moment before answering. "Because I respect you," he said simply, "and I want to help in small ways, that is all." She considered his words carefully, then nodded slowly. "Respect is rare," she said. "You show it in small actions, not just words. I notice that, thank you." The warmth of her acknowledgement stayed with him. He realized that their connection was growing not because of grand gestures, but because of respect, trust, and shared moments of quiet understanding. In the simple act of helping with clothes and carrying firewood, they were building something meaningful, step by step. Before leaving that afternoon, he mounted his horse and looked at her one last time. She was kneeling by the river, sewing patches onto her dress with care. Her tattered clothes now looked a little stronger, a little brighter, and her spirit seemed even more resilient. He tipped his hat to her. "I will come again," he said softly. She looked up and smiled faintly, a small but genuine gesture. "Perhaps," she said. As he rode away, he thought about the quiet strength she displayed, the dignity she maintained despite her hardships, and the small trust they had begun to share. He realized that real connections were built slowly, patiently, and with respect. He felt a quiet joy in knowing he could be a part of her life in some small way, without imposing, without asking for anything in return. The river flowed steadily, the water glinting in the sunlight, carrying with it the story of two people from different worlds, slowly forming a bond built on trust, respect, and quiet kindness. And as he rode further along the trail, the cowboy knew he would return again, not just for water, but for the chance to continue this gentle, growing friendship with the woman who had captured his admiration and respect. The days grew warmer, and the cowboy found himself returning to the river almost every morning. Each visit brought a small sense of purpose, a feeling he had not realized he missed during his long travels. The river had become more than a place to rest. It was a place where he felt a quiet connection growing with the Apache woman. Every morning he watched her work with the same calm strength, her tattered dress moving gently in the sunlight, her dark hair tied back but escaping in soft strands around her face. That morning he approached slowly as always, but noticed something different. She seemed lighter somehow, more at ease with his presence. Perhaps it was the comfort of familiarity, or perhaps it was the understanding that he had come with respect and no expectation. "Good morning," he said softly, tipping his hat. "Good morning," she replied, her voice carrying a quiet warmth. She did not look surprised this time. Instead, she seemed to welcome him, even if only a little. He tied his horse to a tree and walked closer. "I brought some bread and dried fruit today," he said gently. "Nothing fancy, but I thought it might help for your breakfast." She looked at him, and for a moment a small smile touched her lips. "You think of others often," she said quietly. "It is unusual but kind." He shrugged slightly, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I do not think it is unusual," he said. "I only believe people should help each other when they can." For a while, they worked in silence, her hands moving over the clothes, his hands carrying water from the river or helping with small bundles. Each gesture was careful, respectful, deliberate. He noticed the strength in her arms, the steady rhythm of her work, and the quiet determination in her expression. Despite the hardships her life presented, she faced them with courage and grace that impressed him deeply. Finally, as she laid the washed clothes on the rocks to dry, he spoke again. "Do you ever get tired of doing everything yourself?" he asked gently. She paused, looking at him, considering the question. "Sometimes," she admitted quietly. "It is hard, but what choice do I have? I care for my children, I care for my home. If I do not do it, no one will." He nodded slowly, understanding her sense of responsibility. "You are very brave," he said. "I think many people would give up if they were in your place." Her eyes softened. "Bravery is not always choice," she said. "Sometimes it is what life requires, but words of respect like yours are rare. They make the burden a little lighter." The cowboy felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. It was true, he had not come with grand gestures, only small acts of kindness. And yet those small gestures were making a difference. They had built a bridge of trust, slowly and gently, without words or demands, only patience and understanding. He set down a small basket of bread and fruit on the riverbank. "You should eat something," he said. "You have been working hard." She looked at the basket, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "It is generous," she said softly. "I thank you," he smiled. "Please." "It is only a small thing. Even the strongest people need nourishment." She took a piece of bread and a few slices of fruit, eating quietly while he watched. It was a simple moment, yet it felt significant. There was a subtle shift in their connection now, a soft acknowledgement of care and trust. The cowboy realized that these quiet mornings, these shared moments, were building something far deeper than casual acquaintance. After a while, she put down her food and looked at him. "You return often," she said, curiosity mingling with caution. "Why do you keep coming?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Because I respect you," he said simply. "And because I want to help in small ways, I do not expect anything in return. I only want to make your days a little easier." She studied him, her dark eyes steady. There was no hesitation, no doubt in his tone. She could sense his sincerity. Slowly she nodded. "Respect is rare," she said. "You show it not just in words but in actions. That matters." The cowboy felt a quiet warmth spread through him. There was something extraordinary in this simple acknowledgement. He realized that true trust, true friendship was built not through grand declarations, but through consistent, gentle acts of care. As the sun climbed higher, he offered to help with her home. She hesitated at first but finally agreed. Together, they gathered wood for her fireplace and repaired a small section of her dwelling that had been weakened by recent storms. He moved carefully, aware that this space was hers, respecting every boundary she set. She, in turn, allowed him to work beside her, her movements gradually less guarded, more accepting. During a break, she began to speak quietly about her children. "They are young," she said, "and strong in their own ways. I teach them to work, to be careful, to respect the land. Life is hard, but they are learning." He listened intently, genuinely interested. "You must be proud of them," he said. She smiled faintly. "I am," she admitted. "They are my reason to keep going. Every challenge I face it for them." He nodded, feeling admiration deepen. The quiet strength of this woman, her resilience, and her unwavering dedication to her children were remarkable. He realized that his small efforts, bringing supplies, helping with chores, were not just acts of kindness, but gestures that supported a life filled with courage and responsibility. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, he noticed how the river reflected the warm light, turning the water golden. She was seated by the riverbank now, mending her clothes with the patches he had brought. Her movements were precise, her expression calm, and he could see the satisfaction in her work. "I see your dress is stronger now," he said gently. "It looks better than before." She looked at him and smiled softly. "Yes," she said, "it will last longer now." "It makes my work easier, thank you." He shook his head slightly. "I only gave you what you needed. You did the work, you made it stronger." For a moment they sat in silence, watching the river flow. It was a peaceful silence, comfortable and easy. The cowboy felt a deep sense of connection, a bond formed through respect, trust, and shared effort. He realized that sometimes the simplest actions, helping with clothes, bringing small supplies, offering quiet conversation, could create the strongest ties. As the day began to end, he helped her carry the remaining firewood inside her home. She allowed him to enter briefly, showing him the small, tidy space where she and her children lived. It was humble, filled with simple furnishings, but there was a sense of care in every detail, a quiet pride in making a home with what she had. "You have made this place very comfortable," he said. She smiled faintly. "It is enough," she said. "I make what I can of it." "Comfort is in small things," he nodded, realizing how much wisdom was in her words. Life had taught her resilience, patience, and humility, and she carried those lessons with quiet dignity. He felt honored to be allowed into this small part of her world, even briefly. Before leaving, he placed a small bundle of extra fabric and dried beans on the table inside her home. "For you and your children," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes wide with appreciation. "You are very thoughtful," she said quietly. "I thank you." He tipped his hat, smiling. "It is nothing. I only wish to help." As he mounted his horse and rode away, he glanced back one last time. She was inside, finishing her work, the light from the setting sun casting a golden glow over her small dwelling. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that these small acts had built a bond, however gentle, and that trust had grown between them. Over the next several days, their connection continued to strengthen. He helped with small chores, brought supplies, and offered quiet conversation, always respectful, never imposing. She, in turn, began to allow him more access, trusting him in ways she had not before. Their mornings by the river became a shared ritual, a gentle routine of work, conversation, and understanding. The cowboy realized that true friendship and trust were built slowly, with patience and respect, not with demands or grand gestures. And in these quiet moments by the river, he learned the value of small kindnesses, the power of gentle support, and the beauty of a bond formed through understanding and shared effort. The river flowed steadily, reflecting the warm light of the sun. The Apache woman continued her work, her dress now strengthened with patches, her hands steady and confident. And the cowboy, riding home as the sky turned pink with sunset, knew he would return again. Not for any reward, not for recognition, but because he had found a rare and precious connection, a friendship built on trust, respect, and the quiet strength of human kindness. The morning air was crisp and bright, carrying the gentle sounds of the river flowing steadily over smooth stones. The cowboy rode slowly along the familiar trail, feeling the soft earth beneath his horse's hooves. Over the past weeks, the river had become more than just a stop on his journey. It had become a place of quiet friendship and trust, a connection that had grown slowly, patiently, and with respect. Today, he felt a small thrill of anticipation, wondering if she would be there as usual. When he arrived, he saw her kneeling by the river, her hands moving over the clothes with that same steady rhythm he had come to admire. Her tattered dress, now patched with the cloth he had brought, moved gently with the breeze. She looked up as he approached, her dark eyes meeting his. This time there was no hesitation, no flicker of caution, just a quiet acknowledgement and perhaps even a hint of welcome. "Good morning," he said softly, tipping his hat. "Good morning," she replied, her voice carrying warmth and calm. He dismounted and tied his horse to a nearby tree, glancing at the bundle of supplies he had brought. "I brought some beans, dried fruit, and extra bread," he said gently. "Nothing much, but I thought it might help for your meals today." She looked at him, a small, genuine smile forming on her lips. "You think of others often," she said. "It is kind." He shook his head slightly, smiling. "It is only what we can do," he said. "Sometimes small things make a difference." For a while they worked together in silence, their movements synchronized without needing words. He carried water from the river, helped lift heavier bundles, and even assisted in laying the clothes on the rocks to dry. She continued her work with precision, her hands moving with quiet strength, her focus unbroken. The cowboy noticed how much easier her tasks had become since he began visiting. She still carried the weight of her life and responsibilities, but she allowed help now, and he respected her for it. After the clothes were laid out, she paused and looked at him. "You have returned often," she said, curiosity in her voice. "Why do you continue to come?" He thought for a moment, then answered sincerely. "Because I respect you," he said, "and because I want to help in small ways. I do not ask for anything in return. I only wish to make your life a little easier." She considered his words carefully, her eyes softening. "Respect is rare," she said. "You show it not only in words but in actions. That matters to me." The cowboy felt warmth spread through him. It was more than admiration. This was trust, earned slowly through patience and care. He realized that the bond they had built was not just about helping with chores or bringing supplies. It was about understanding, kindness, and shared respect, a connection that crossed the boundaries of their very different worlds. As the sun climbed higher, he offered to help with her home. She hesitated at first, then allowed him to assist with repairing the small walls weakened by recent storms. Together, they worked quietly, moving with care and consideration. The cowboy noticed how her confidence grew with each task they completed, and he admired the quiet pride she took in her home. She, in turn, observed how gently and respectfully he worked, and the trust between them deepened further. During a break, they sat by the river, watching the sunlight glint off the flowing water. She spoke softly about her children, her voice carrying pride and love. "They are learning every day," she said. "I teach them to respect the land, to care for each other, to understand the value of hard work. Life is not easy, but they are strong." He listened carefully, genuinely impressed by her resilience. "You are teaching them more than skills," he said. "You are showing them strength, patience, and courage. That is more valuable than anything else." She looked at him and smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said. "Few people understand that strength comes in quiet ways, in small actions, not just words." He nodded, realizing the truth in her words. That was what their connection had become, a friendship built on actions, respect, and understanding rather than grand gestures or speeches. Each day they had shared small moments, helping and learning from one another, and each day the trust had grown. As the afternoon approached, he helped her carry a bundle of firewood inside her small dwelling. She allowed him in without hesitation now, showing him the simple but carefully arranged home she had created for herself and her children. It was humble, yet filled with care. Every item had a place, every corner reflected thoughtfulness and practicality. He marveled at how she had created warmth and order out of so little, and he felt honored to be allowed into her space. "I am impressed," he said quietly. "This home, it shows how much care you put into everything." She smiled softly. "It is enough," she replied. "Comfort is found in small things. I make what I can of it. That is life." He nodded, feeling a deep respect for her. There was wisdom in her words, strength in her actions, and dignity in her life. Small as her world may seem, she had mastered it with courage and perseverance. He placed a small bundle of supplies on her table: beans, bread, and some fabric patches he had sewn himself. "For you and your children," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes wide with gratitude. "You are very thoughtful," she said quietly. "I thank you." He shook his head. "It is nothing," he said. "I only wish to help." The evening came, painting the sky with warm shades of pink and gold. The river reflected the sunlight, sparkling like tiny diamonds across its surface. She stood by the water, washing the last of her clothes, and he stood nearby, watching her with admiration. For weeks, he had witnessed her strength, her patience, and her quiet dignity. Now he understood that their connection had grown beyond help or kindness. It had become a friendship, built on mutual respect and trust, and something he could not yet name but felt deeply. "I will be leaving soon," he said quietly, "for the next town. But I wanted you to know I will return whenever I can. You have my word." She looked up at him, her eyes calm and steady. "I understand," she said softly, "and I appreciate it. You have brought kindness, respect, and help, and that is rare. I will remember it." He tipped his hat, feeling a mix of sadness and contentment. There was comfort in knowing that he had made a positive difference in her life, even in small ways. And there was hope, too, that their bond, however quiet and humble, would endure despite the distance that his travels would soon create. Before leaving, they shared a final moment by the river. The gentle sound of water moving over the rocks filled the space between them, and they stood in silence, acknowledging what had grown between them over the weeks. He could see in her eyes that she trusted him now, that the small kindnesses and quiet actions had built a bridge of understanding. He felt honored to have been accepted into her life, even briefly. As he mounted his horse, he glanced back one last time. She was standing by the river, her patched dress catching the last light of the sun. She waved faintly, a gesture of farewell and acknowledgement. He waved in return, feeling a warmth spread through him. The cowboy knew that this experience, this connection, would stay with him far longer than the miles he would soon travel. Riding away, he reflected on what he had learned. Small acts of kindness could build trust. Respect was the foundation of friendship. And sometimes, the strongest bonds were formed not through words or promises, but through simple, consistent gestures of care and understanding. The Apache woman returned to her home, finishing her chores with a sense of quiet pride. She glanced at her patched dress, the clean clothes, and the firewood neatly stacked inside. For the first time in weeks, she felt lighter, not just because of the help she had received, but because she had experienced genuine care and respect. The cowboy had shown her that even strangers could offer support without judgment, that kindness could cross boundaries and touch the heart. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, both of them reflected quietly on the bond they had formed. It was a gentle, humble connection, built on patience, understanding, and small acts of care. Neither of them needed to say much. The trust and respect between them were clear, unspoken, but deeply felt. The river continued to flow, carrying with it the story of their friendship, a story of patience, respect, and quiet courage. And as the cowboy rode farther along the trail, he knew he would return, not for recognition, not for reward, but simply because their bond had become something important, something rare and meaningful that he could not leave behind. The Apache woman watched the river, the evening light reflecting on the water, feeling a sense of hope and gratitude she had not experienced in a long time. Her life was still filled with challenges, but now she carried the memory of kindness, the knowledge that respect and trust could exist in the world, and the quiet assurance that she was not entirely alone. And so, life continued, steady and calm like the river. Both the cowboy and the woman would go their separate ways, yet the connection they had formed would remain, a gentle reminder of the power of small gestures, quiet trust, and the beauty of human kindness.